Alright, hello to anyone who is tuning into this video. This video I'm just going to kind of go over the basic concepts and introductions of biology and what biology as a science is. If you're tuning in as a student from my Bio 110 class, the reason why I'm having you watch this video is, as you've probably noticed from the syllabus, we have a lot that's going on for our first day of class. Very exciting stuff, but I want you to watch this video in case we are not able to actually have it as a lecture in class. I'd rather use the class to really spend ample time with the tetrahymena that we're using. If you're not in my Bio 110 class, I'm sorry that you are not. It's going to be a really fun class. Anyway, so to start, I always have to throw out a little kind of side note. I apologize if there are any distractions that do occur during the recording of this video. I am recording from my apartment, and sometimes things just happen. I live on a very interesting street where there's these 50-year-old men that like to race their giant remote control cars up and down the street, or there's construction going on. Major distraction is usually this little nugget here. This is my cat Pharaoh. He's my child. Right now he is sleeping, so we should be set to go, but he has a habit of interrupting my videos by playing with his little squeaky toys. He has 1,000,001 of them. But anyway, hopefully he stays asleep and we won't have any distractions from him. There's some large lawn equipment outside, so hopefully they won't be making any noise. But I'm not making any promises. But anyway, we'll get started. All right, so what is biology? Well, in simple terms, biology is the study of living organisms and their interactions with one another and their environments. Now, this is a very broad definition, and the reason it's so broad is because the scope of biology is very, very vast. Biologists can study anything from the microscopic or submicroscopic view of the cell all the way to ecosystems and the whole living planet. It's a very multifaceted discipline. As you can see here, there's biochemistry, cell bio, pharmacology, anatomy, taxonomy, which deals with the whole classification of systems, botany, which deals with the study of plants, bioinformatics, which is the study of kind of the statistical properties and using the biological analysis of different systems and genetic information or molecular information. So it's, again, very multifaceted. Now, the reason or the fact that biology as a science has such a broad scope has to do with the tremendous amount of diversity of life on Earth. And the source of this diversity is evolution. Evolution is the process of gradual change during which you have the formation of or the arisal of new species from pre-existing or older species through various processes such as natural selection, adaptation, speciation, mutation, genetic drift, etc. All of these, again, play into one another to allow for change over time. And the evolution of various life forms on Earth can be summarized in what we call phylogenetic trees, which are these branching diagrams, like this one here, that shows the inferred, sorry, I didn't like my mouse there, that show the inferred evolutionary relationships among biological species based on similarities or differences in their genetics, morphology, which are the physical traits, and or both. Now, the phylogenetic tree is composed of nodes and branches. Here's a node, here's a branch. The internal nodes represent ancestors and are points in evolution when based on scientific evidence that we have currently, an ancestor is thought to have diverged to form two new species. Now, the actual length of these branches are proportional to the amount of time that has elapsed from that divergence event in evolutionary history. And we can use those branch lengths to infer how old a species is and when it was thought to have arisen or diverged from that common ancestor. Now, we group all living things into one of three domains. Those domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. From here, organisms then fall into one of six kingdoms, and I have a nice classification chart for you guys here. So in domain bacteria, the kingdom is bacteria or eubacteria. In domain archaea, they fall into the kingdom Archaeobacteria. And in the domain eukarya, they fall into one of four kingdoms. You have Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. And then from there you have phylum, family, class, all the way down to species. This is a chart. It's a wonderful chart. You see the breakdown in the first two levels of classification of organisms, and then it gives you description of the cell types, their structures, number of cells. This is something that will carry through for the rest of the class. So this is a great chart to kind of hold on to, especially with differences in cell structures. This is something when we go over the different parts of the cells and membranes and cell walls will really come into play and will come in handy, especially here when we go over kind of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. Anyway, going back. So the earliest life forms that biologists have found in the fossil record date back at least 3.8 to 2.5 billion years ago. And these early organisms were small, single-celled, aqueous, meaning they were water-dwelling prokaryotes. So they lacked external appendages, possessed no nucleus, and had limited internal structures. Now, most of these were Archaeobacteria, which could inhibit extreme conditions, which is why they were able to kind of serve as your first life forms. So they're able to live in habitats that are high in toxic gases but oxygen-free. We call these methanogens. Some are what we call thermophiles. They are able to live in extremely hot climates. So again, you have a group of prokaryotes that are able to exist in very extreme conditions. As for more complex cells, those first appeared in the fossil record approximately 1.5 billion years ago, right at this point here in history. These cells had key innovations that differentiated them from prokaryotes. The major difference being the presence of a nucleus. They also had complex internal structures, or organelles, and were multicellular. Now, you can probably guess, these are eukaryotes. Now, all living things require 7 basic properties or characteristics in order to survive and thrive. So real quickly, those characteristics are cellular structure, meaning that all things are made up of cells and exhibit organization. You have reproduction, so living things must be able to reproduce, and that plays on to this characteristic here, the passing on of hereditary information. They must be able to use energy, so obtain and use it. They must maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is balance or equilibrium. It's a stable body condition that is necessary for maintenance of life and life functions. They must be able to respond to stimuli, so response to their environment and changes in the environment. And then lastly, they must be able to grow and develop. So cells are the structural and functional units of life. They're a level of organization at which the properties of life emerge. They're right here in the biological organization of things. Now, all organisms follow cell theory, which says that all organisms are composed of cells. And they can either occur singly, like your single-celled organisms, or as the subunits of multicellular organisms. Whatever the case is, whether they're single-celled or multicelled, all organisms exhibit a complex structure and order. And we call that order the kind of biological organization or the hierarchy of life. And that's this here. The hierarchy of life organizes kind of our communication and understanding of life into a hierarchy that runs from small subatomic particles and atoms all the way to the organism and then beyond into large ecosystems in the biosphere. So what happens is you start off with an atom, many atoms come together to form molecules. Molecules come together to form a cell. You have many cells that are common in structure and function. They form tissues, and then when you have tissues that are functioning together to form a specific task, you have an organ, and it goes on from there until you have an organism. And then after organism, you have population, community, and then your ecosystem, biosphere, etc. So with reproduction, first you need reproduction of cells, right? You need to produce new cells for growth, maintenance, and repair, and you also need reproduction of individuals themselves. And this can occur either asexually or through sexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction is when a single parent organism reproduces itself. So it contains both male and female parts, and that parent organism propagates offspring that are genetically identical to it. And you see this a lot in plant species through something called budding, which is this here. If you take a sweet potato or a clove of garlic and you put one end in water, it will sprout roots and then will begin shooting off these little sprouts. And those are little buds. And each of those will be genetically identical to the parent potato or garlic clove. And a lot of times this will occur during times of environmental stress. You see it with certain tree species. They'll do it if they have a fungal infection or some sort of parasitic infection. They'll shoot off a sprout or a bud as a kind of this panic system to try and create a new organism that's genetically identical to itself so that it can continue its lineage or the continuance of that individual species. Sexual reproduction is different. So that's when you have two parent organisms contributing genetic material and information. So you get half your material from mom, half from dad. They come together to create a fertilized zygote, and then that goes on to form an embryo, which becomes little you. So this can be with R species or K species. R species referred to those species that have very high offspring loads, like you're going into like hundreds and thousands. So they reproduce very quickly. They have very short lifespans. Think of your bugs, like your fruit flies. K species are ones that have longer gestation periods, usually very few offspring during those gestation periods, maybe 1 to 4, and they invest a lot of parental care. So these are most of your mammals. So the important thing about reproduction, when you have the reproduction of offspring, is that you have the passing on of hereditary information or hereditary traits. So you're passing on characteristics and genetic information that allow for the continuance of a species. That goes into kind of the importance of heredity and that characteristic of life. So all living things must maintain homeostasis. So again, homeostasis is a stable body condition necessary for maintaining life. And these are regulatory mechanisms. So homeostasis regulates blood pressure, temperature, blood volume, water balance, any regulatory mechanism that can maintain a normal body function when there is some sort of environmental or internal change. Usually it's an internal change. So in order to maintain homeostasis, organisms must be able to regulate. Regulate meaning the ability to adjust internal body functions to accommodate environmental changes. So you can think of when you get when you're exercising and you start getting very warm, body temperature rises. So at that point, your blood vessels dilate, which allow the blood vessels to actually come closer to the surface of the body, which allows for additional heat loss through the skin to the environment. Additionally, sweat glands secrete fluid, and that fluid is then evaporated, and because of the high specific heat and some of your basic water properties, when that water evaporates from your body, it pulls off a lot of the heat from your body. So your body is able to lose a lot of that excess heat to the environment, and that allows your body to go back to a normal body temperature. Kind of the same mechanisms with a fever. When you have a pathogen, your body will increase to higher body temperatures that are above the threshold for that pathogen in an attempt to kill off that pathogen. Once that pathogen is destroyed, your body will, the regulatory mechanisms will kick back into play to lower your body temperature out of fever back to your normal 98.7 or lower, whatever you may run at. So all organisms must be able to obtain and use energy. So energy is required for virtually all processes to occur, whether it's growth, development, reproduction, etc. Organisms must be able to harness energy and then convert it into a usable source. So energy is obtained through complex pathways of chemical reactions. And the sum of all these chemical reactions that occur in the body is what we call metabolism. Now, these can either be anabolic processes, which is when small molecules join together to form a large molecule. An example would be plants harvesting energy from the sun. Or they can be catabolic, which is when you have the breakdown of large molecules into smaller components. Example, digestion. Whatever it is, again, you have this, you're obtaining energy and then you're breaking it down into a usable form. All things must be able to sense and react to stimuli, which are changes in the environment. And this plays more to external changes. With homeostasis, we were talking about more of like internal changes. Responding to stimuli is more of these external changes in the environment. So again, these can be any physical or chemical change in the environment that causes a deviation from normal or from homeostasis, right? So these can be effects by light. When things respond to changes in light, we call it phototaxis. It could be changes in temperature. So you think of leopard tortoises in the Kalahari Desert in in Botswana. The temperature of the nest changes the gender of the turtle offspring. Chemicals. So if organisms respond to chemicals, we call it chemotaxis. Sometimes they'll be attracted to chemical gradients. So some organisms may be attracted to higher concentrations of a chemical. Some may be kind of repelled from those and attracted to lower concentrations. Odors or pheromones. These are what ants use they lay down these chemical odor trails, which we call pheromone trails, that send out alarms, allow ants to follow different trails to your picnic or your cat food, which is always lovely. Some organisms respond to touch, something called thingmatropism. So you think of those, if you watch the movie Avatar, there's this awesome scene where there's this plant that looks like a Christmas tree, and what's the guy's name? I think it's Jake, touches the plant and it collapses down on itself. And that's actually taken from a real live organism. I think it's called the Christmas tree coral. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. But it's in the ocean and it responds to touch. When you actually touch it, it will coil in on itself. And there's many plant species that do that. I forget the name of it, but there's one in Ecuador when I was doing 3 months of research in Ecuador that my professor brought over, and you would touch it and it would just coil in on itself. And then after a few minutes, it would coil back out into a normal leaflet. And then you have some other gradients of response: sound, movement, or velocity. That's what salmon use for laying their eggs. So it's all these responses to a change. And an organism's response forms the basis of behavior. Again, the ability to detect and respond to information about the environment. And the reason why that is so important is because it enables adaptability and survivability, right? If something cannot detect a change and then respond to it appropriately, it's not going to be able to adapt in the appropriate manners to allow for survivability, right? Okay, and then lastly, there's growth and development. So organisms assimilate materials from their environment and will exhibit increased size, which is your growth, and increased specialization, which is development. So that's the creation of form and function. And some organisms, as they develop, as they age, can become more complex. Some just become more mature over time. So that's it for this little mini lecture. Again, if you're in the Bio 110 class, this is to allow us to have more time to focus on playing with the tetrahymena. If you're not in the Bio 110 class, sorry, it's going to be a lot of fun, but I hope this cleared up any questions that you might have.